When you have young children, getting anywhere on time is all but impossible, correct? Getting anywhere on time with children or your grandchildren is all but impossible, and that especially applies to church. It is hard to get to one spot on time when you have a 3-year-old and a 7-year-old. My church in Iowa, we had a service that started at 11:15, and there would still be families that came dragging in at 11:35 like they had a 12-round fight in the minivan on the way there. So getting to church on time is difficult with young ones, and that was probably the case at 16th Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama in September of 1963. There were 4 young girls that were running late to worship that day. The children's choir was to sing, and these young girls were dressed in their white dresses to stand before the congregation and share God's word in music. But because they were running late, they didn't make their way down into the basement where the choir was rehearsing. They were standing in a corner behind the chancel and slipped into a bathroom to make sure their dresses looked good, to tie up the bows in their hair, and wait for the rest of their youth choir to come up from the basement, join them, and go in and lead worship. And then at 10:22, that September morning, a bomb went off in the bathroom where they were preparing to worship. A bomb blew in the wall of that bathroom, planted there the night before by the Klan to, quote, send a message. And these 4 young girls, Addie Mae Collins, Cynthia Wesley, Carol Robertson, and Carol McNair, were killed instantly as they were preparing to lead the church in worship. Many months ago, I had committed to preaching on the story of these 4 young girls that were murdered at 16th Street Baptist Church. And little did I know how appropriate their witness would be to what we've had happen in our state this week. I'm sure Monday morning in Nashville was no different than that morning in Birmingham. Parents, on a Monday morning, no one is excited about a Monday when you're taking your kids to school, especially the children. And as kids were clamoring to get ready and running late and have the wrong backpack and did you pack the lunch, they pile into the car and make their way to school. And there at Covenant Presbyterian School, 6 people were murdered by a gunman that shot their way into the school, taking 6 lives, including the life of a young girl named Evelyn Dykus. Evelyn is a member at Woodmont Christian Church, which is a sister congregation of ours, pastored by Clay Stauffer, who grew up in our church, ordained at our church. His father served here for many years. I've known Clay since he was in college and I was in seminary. Clay did her service on Friday. Not only do we have a connection to this tragedy through our congregations, Richmond and Christy Williams I've known since I was 19 years old. I met them my first day on campus as a freshman in college. Richmond and I talk literally every day, and Christy gives us permission to kind of be guys together and to ham it up a little bit. They are both elders at Woodmont Christian Church, and Christy was Evelyn's Sunday school teacher. Stephen Godfrey is one of the most respected investigative journalists in our country, and he lives in Nashville, and I'm honored to call him my friend. His daughter attends school in the Green Hills area, right next to Covenant Presbyterian School. And so when the word got out that there was a shooting in this area, the fear and the grief that just began to bubble up, and he shared this week with those that subscribed to his writing what he went through, talking for 40 minutes straight about all that unfolded in his mind and in the city between him and his wife, and the hug he gave his daughter like never, ever before. He closed out what he shared with his subscribers by saying the number one comment he received from friends, the number one text message that was sent to him from across the country was, "I can't imagine. I can't imagine that happening. I can't imagine what you're going through." And Stephen replied to his audience, "Well, you'd better imagine. If you're raising a child in our country today, where there have been 22 different shootings in the last calendar year that took the life of an elementary child, you'd better learn to imagine it. Violence, evil, and death can usurp our false sense of serenity at a moment's notice. This is nothing new, though. It's chronic to the human condition. There is nothing new in what is happening. And the God that we worship weeps with the calamity that is us and grieves the eroding of shalom in somewhere as innocent as a third grade classroom. Palm Sunday kicks off with a sense of joy, a normal, exciting day of worship. The whole crowd, a great crowd, it says, has come out to gather and worship Jesus. Now, the crowd is built a variety of ways. Delight has been a magnet that has brought people to Jesus. There are people that had seen Jesus raise Lazarus from the dead, and they decided they wanted to follow him. There are people that had heard that Lazarus had been raised from the dead in Bethany, and they came out to see it. They're like, Lazarus, we went to the visitation and brought him a pot roast, and now we found out he's back alive. Let's go see what happens. And then as Jesus makes his way to Jerusalem, the crowd expands as Passover is preparing to take place. Jerusalem swells up to over 250,000 people, 5 times their normal population on Passover. It's like Elvis Week, Memphis in May, and the Grizzlies in the playoffs, all in one room. There is a crowd for Jesus. And he enters into Jerusalem with not children, but adults, waving palm branches, a symbol of a king coming home from victory, and shouting, "Hosanna, Hosanna, liberate us, God, rescue us from all that we are experiencing in the calamity that is this world." Riding a donkey, spoken of in the book of Zechariah, the King, the Messiah, comes riding in to town. This text ends with this exasperated sigh from religious leaders, because sometimes religious leaders get in the way of what God is doing. Look, the whole world's going after him. The whole world is following him. We got to do something about this. His ministry, his compassion, and his message cannot be stopped. Jesus is drawing the whole world to that which is good and beautiful and kind. This is the viral moment of Jesus' ministry. His market share had never been higher. The word had never been hotter than Palm Sunday. And yet 5 days later, the crowd disintegrates, and Jesus' tortured body hangs on a cross with nails of steel driven through his hands and his feet for him to suffocate to death, on display for passerbys to see. Executed by the government, mocked in his death. I, like you, read this story and even look at the events of the world and say, why didn't somebody do something to stop this? Someone needs to be able to prevent something like this from taking place. Well, in just the next few pages of John, you see that Peter, who swears, I'll be there with you the whole time, I'll die with you, disowns Jesus 3 times. We use the word deny, but it's better translated disowns. I don't have anything to do with this guy. The high priest, they mock him, they slap him. And then Pilate, the representative of the Roman government, he knows there's nothing wrong with Jesus. He stands there and says, I find nothing wrong with this man. I find him innocent. I see nothing to cause him to die. But Pilate begins the long list of politicians who would rather do nothing so they can keep their power. And Pilate washes his hands and lets the people do what they wish. Flogged, mocked with a crown of thorns, hung out to dry at Golgotha, executed between 2 thieves. You see, the holiest week of our faith includes the worst that the world can do to itself. And the holiest week of our faith shows the worst that we can do to God. The slaughter of innocent life was visited upon us this week and anchors the beginning of Holy Week. Now, I know that we are people of resurrection. We are people that announce the resurrection. Next week is the celebration of the resurrection. I mean, like, I am going to sing Christ the Lord is risen today louder and more off key than it has ever been sung. Charles is going to have the organ shake the floor below you. We're pulling out all the stops and not just the stops on the organ. See, I know what an organ is. We are going to have drama and music and power and liturgy and maybe a little bit of preaching to announce our faith. But what do we do while we're waiting for resurrection? How do we sustain hope when we want to give up? Because, see, we need a faith that causes us to look at our world as it is, not look away from our world. We need a faith that helps us look at our lives for what they are, not turn away from our lives and hope for the sweet by and by. How do we sustain hope when death and chaos and evil show up in a 3rd grade classroom? Growing up, I had 2 TV shows that I loved to watch every morning before we were running late to get to school. Growing up in the Midwest, I had WGN out of Chicago, Channel 9. Anybody have that as a kid? I used to wake up and watch the Bozo Show. If you think it's autobiographical, go ahead and get your jokes in now. But I love the Bozo Show, and they always ended with the grand prize game, which I always thought I would win if my parents would but take me to Chicago. Well, after the Bozo Show was over and we were, drinking our Cinnamon Toast Crunch out of our bowl and waiting to get to school, then Mr. Rogers would come on. Now, I think it gets lost in translation sometimes, but Mr. Rogers was a Presbyterian minister. And his ministry of his television show began with funding from the Presbyterian Church to teach children the virtues and the way of Jesus, the way of shalom and kindness and goodness and beauty. And in one show, students and children asked Mr. Rogers, what do we do when bad things happen in the world? How do we keep going when people that we care about are hurting and grieving? And Mr. Rogers said, always look for the helpers. Always look for the helpers. Even when the world is falling apart, God raises up incomplete, cynical people like me and sends you and I not away from the chaos, but into it to be ministers of Christ's hope. Look for the helpers. And I found that when I look for the helpers, God gives me just enough hope to keep waiting for resurrection. About 2 years ago, I joined, for lack of a better term, a fraternity at 45 years old. It was a text thread for 30 adult people that were addicted to college football. None of us knew each other. None of us had any connection of note. And we joined this to just share our great passion, addiction to the game. And it expanded out to beyond football, where we would talk about life and talk about what was going on in the world and in our families. And even they've heard a little bit about y'all. So last fall, we made a commitment. Let's get together and meet each other. Let's get together and meet face to face with the people that we have shared, some pretty painful stuff in our lives. So we descended on Birmingham to go to a football game at UAB. We're all kind of located in the southeast, from basically Texas to Atlanta. And as silly as it sounds like how you begin on Unsolved Mysteries, but I drove to Birmingham to meet 29 people I'd never met before. But I know that if I called any of them and said I'm in a tragedy and in chaos, that they would come and help me. So I went. And I got there a little early. And so I wandered down through downtown Birmingham and stood in front of 16th Street Baptist Church. And at the top of every hour during the business day, they would have tours through their building. And so I went in, and they gave us a picture tour through the basement about the birth of the church, about their launching into the civil rights movement, about the bombing itself and the ministries that continue to this day. They showed us a short video that moved me to tears about these 4 girls and how they fought to keep their faith as a congregation moving forward. In the final leg of the tour, we walked up one of those old, crookedy church stairs with red carpet and walked to the back of the sanctuary, and they led us down the center aisle of this holy ground. And in front of the communion table and the pulpit, they asked us to turn around. And we all looked to the top of the balcony, and there it was, the Wales window. You will see this window on the front of your bulletin. You'll also find a print of this out in the foyer, framed by our own Tom Clifton, that hangs in my office. There was a young Sunday school class in Wales, across the pond, that heard about the bombing at 16th Street Baptist Church and couldn't believe what happened to children their age. And so they began to collect money to send a gift to that church. And there was an artist that stepped in and said, I would like to help with this gift. And they raised money, and they put a cap that no one could give more than $100 so that it would be from the entire country. Everyone could contribute. And what was created from this gift, the brainchild of these children, was this massive stained glass that you'll see on your bulletin. If you look, you see a black depiction of Christ. His right arm is pushing up and pushing away the hatred and the injustice of the world. And his left hand is reaching out to offer forgiveness and compassion. And as you see at the bottom, it says, you do it to me. We think of Matthew 25, where Jesus says, when you feed someone, you fed me. When you visited someone, you fed me. But when we hurt a child, we did it to Jesus. This picture has stirred me for months since I locked eyes with this window. And I do my best, though sinful and incomplete, to push away hatred and injustice and to reach out with compassion and forgiveness. But I know that in this world, in need of shalom, it is a child who is going to lead us. We are here in a world struggling to find its soul, but the light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not, cannot, and will not overcome it. So look for the helpers. Look for the light. Look for the light that's shining even through broken windows. And let us imagine and work and worship and pray for a world that captures just enough light to bring home safely all of our children.